Hi everyone, I'm Jacob Vogel. Thank you for watching my very first video. Some scary stuff there. I would like to, for my inaugural video, I would like to talk about what's been going on today, March 22nd, 2016, and how that relates to Donald Trump. Today there was another horrible terrorist attack. This time it was in Brussels, Belgium. And as happens whenever such events occur, people start asking questions about security. How can we stay safe? How do we prevent future attacks? And so forth. And since Donald Trump is currently the top Republican candidate, he's been asked his views. And so I'd like to talk about the Trump foreign policy. Whenever I hear him talk about the need to reassess our foreign interventions, how going into Libya was a bad idea, and how bombing civilians tends to create more enemies, you know, that whole blowback concept, I get really excited. It makes sense. I like it. There's a lot of evidence to support those views. It's a lot more of a constitutional policy, a lot more of a libertarian philosophy, and definitely it's more of a human rights-based philosophy. But then you have terrorist attacks. You have San Bernardino, you have the attacks in Paris, and of course today in Brussels. And so you ask, well, I mean, what do we do? And Trump's answer to that isn't really libertarian. It isn't really based on the idea of liberty or protecting rights. He talks about the need to be hard and to be strong, and of course we do need to address these problems. But he goes on saying that he supports waterboarding, and that if we need to make the laws or expand them to do whatever needs to be done, in his words, that's fine. It's fine because the terrorists don't use laws. ISIS doesn't have laws, and we do, and we want to follow the law. So we need to pass laws that gives us the authority to do the things like waterboarding and capturing the families of terrorists and all this other stuff. Again, it's whatever we need to do to be safe and win. And of course, the initial knee-jerk reaction is, yes, we do need to do this. We've been attacked and we need to go and destroy our enemy. But it's also important to step back for a moment and to think about what this actually means. We need to think about the consequences and the path that it leads us down. Now, nobody wants to be the first to break Godwin's law, but I'm about to, and I ask that you please stay with me here. You know, a prime, somewhat recent example of all of this, with parallels, is Nazi Germany. The idea here was that Germany was under threat. They were under siege. Now, in their minds, it was this great Jewish conspiracy, but it was also anarchists and communists. And of course, we in the West also opposed the Soviet Union. And so they were under threat by that. Eventually they had conflicts with France and with the UK once Germany went into Poland. So how do you deal with all that? How do you deal with threats externally and domestically? While there are some existing legal frameworks under which they could operate, to make sure all of their actions and the ultimate goals of the Nazi regime were palatable with the German people, who by now are at war, they had to come up with other legal means and frameworks. The problem was that they ended up being so broad in scope and in meaning that ultimately it all turned basically into the words of Hitler were law, and the words of Goering and Himmler were law. And of course, all of that was done in the name of preserving the German right and protecting the people and accomplishing the goals of the nation. But what did it actually do? What did it lead to, having that mindset? You ended up with the Gestapo. You ended up with the T4 euthanasia programs killing the disabled, going in and ransacking people's homes and searching for terrorists, aka Jews, and homosexuals and intellectuals and communists, and even people who were proud German patriots who simply disagreed with the Nazi government. And when you start talking about doing whatever we can, when you talk about creating back doors into encryption and allow the government to search anywhere and everywhere, all in the name of safety, we have to remember government is run by human beings, and human beings are corruptible. We make mistakes. We fall victim to the prejudices we hold and the appeals of power and authority. So unless you have openness and transparent checks and balances, and unless the people know what the government is doing and has the power to actually stop the government, if you don't have those things, government runs amok. And we've already seen this kind of secrecy and non-accountability with the FISA courts and literally thousands of abuses by the NSA. Without such protections, and an innate respect for liberty, you have what could have been legitimate revolutions in places like Cuba and elsewhere that all end up turning into nightmares for millions of people. The Batista regime, even though they were backed by America, they weren't pillars of democracy. It was corrupt and cruel and mean. Many people were arrested and tortured by this American-backed government in Cuba. And so then you have Castro with his ragtag team of, liberation fighters, and things could have ended well. But what happened? Well, Castro won, and now they have power. They were the oppressed, and unfortunately what happens many times is when the oppressed becomes the ones in power, the oppressed oppresses the oppressors. They create new enemies, and you have class struggle. And everything else that goes with it. The revolution never dies. The revolution technically is still going on after all of these decades. The same thing in North Korea. The revolution continues. You had decades in China, these massive purges and rounding up people, and the 3 revolutions, and all of this terribleness. And tens of millions of people thrown in jail, denied their rights, all because the government was trying to get at an actual enemy. But then the enemy turned not just the people who were already their enemies, but to the friends and the families of the enemies, and then the generations later on. Well, your grandfather used to be a capitalist, and so now we have to throw you in jail and destroy your rights and your family. And that is what happens. And of course, that creates more discontent and more enemies. So it really bothers me to hear this type of rhetoric in American politics, in Western politics. You can go after your enemy and defeat them without turning into your enemy. When you do the things terrorists do to fight terrorism, you become the terrorist. You can't defend the Constitution by tearing it up. You cannot defend American freedoms by crushing them. We fought the Nazis and we won the war, and we put Nazi war criminals on trial. We fought the Japanese and we won the war, and we put the criminals on trial. We've even put domestic terrorists like Timothy McVeigh on trial. It can be done. If you follow the law, you follow the Constitution, you can still win. Terrorism is frightening because it can pop up anywhere. But I would argue that what's more frightening in many ways is having Imperial Japan across one coast and Nazi Germany overrunning all of Europe across the other coast. Tens of millions of men under arms, guns pointed toward you, U-boats running the seas. I mean, we had Nazi submarines right off the coast of New York Harbor and in the Gulf. They even landed operatives on American shores with the purpose of blowing up dams and factories. We had the Japanese sending explosive balloons over to set fire to the vast forests along the Pacific coast. And Japan was experimenting with chemical and biological weapons too. They could have easily sent balloons over and taken out Seattle or Los Angeles. These enemies were organized, had huge sums of money and infrastructure, and controlled millions of square miles of territory. And all of that was arrayed against us. At the very brink, all you really had was the United States, along with the UK, which had barely managed to survive, and the Soviet Union, which is being chopped into little bits and about to collapse. Not exactly a recipe for success. And of course, we weren't exactly friends with the Soviets, but we fought and we persevered. Basically, against half the planet when you look at terms of military strength and resources. And what happened? We won. We won largely without turning our backs on our principles. And the time we did turn our backs, when we sent Japanese Americans to concentration camps, that effort not only damaged our national soul, but it didn't do a damn thing to win the war. And of course, within that, what do we have today? We have a small group of people who have been incensed by decades of meddling and intervention by the West. Granted, today the motivation isn't necessarily what it used to be. The genie is out, and now it's largely terrorism for the sake of terror. But we still have to recognize when our actions contribute to radical motivation and think about long-term consequences. The point is, there's nothing wrong with following our Constitution and following the same principles that we had going into World War II. No one thinks we were honestly friends with the Soviet Union. We were spying on them and they were spying on us. Heck, they knew about the atomic bomb before President Truman even told them. And today, are we besties with Russia? No. but Russia has shown that they are willing to put skin in the game to fight ISIS. So why are we talking about no-fly zones and shooting down Russian planes? You join with people who are willing to fight the same fight you are. That's how you win. And then once you've defeated the immediate threat, you can deal with the other things. But this insanity that we hear from pretty much everybody running for president, but especially Trump, and even Ted Cruz, who's gone off the deep end with supporting military interventions around the world and promoting domestic spying programs, there's simply no reason why we can't stick to our principles and still get the job done like we have time and time again. And the last thing we need is someone in office who does not understand this. The last thing we need is some guy that's basically pumped up on steroids, going around half-cocked and yelling, "We need to be strong, and I know people, and I'm great at this, and we will be so strong, and we just have to do whatever we need to because yada, yada, yada." That's not what we need. Number one, that isn't a policy, and even if you could somehow craft it into a coherent policy that takes into, and then take it to its logical conclusion, then we end up being an actual police state. I know that phrase is used a lot, but we're nowhere near being the kind of big brother mass surveillance, if you have nothing to hide, let me in type of society we would become under the vision of people like Trump. And it's time that libertarians and actual lovers of liberty, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or even a freaking socialist, it's time that we all stand up against this madness. If our leaders and those who are seeking to lead, if they won't be the adult in the room, then it's up to us, we the people, to stand up and be the adult and take control of the situation. Because I, for one, am not willing to be led by the nose or otherwise forced into some kind of monstrous situation, all in the name of security or patriotism. Waving a flag and chanting USA, USA, and towing the line with your head down is not patriotism. Patriotism is standing up for what is right, not just because it's legal. Making torture legal doesn't make it right. Not just because the polls show most people support X, Y, and Z, but to stand up for what is right and to defend the founding principles of our country. Because when we turn our backs on that, we are no longer Americans. There's no more line that separates us from the barbarians at the gate. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that that line stays, that there is a clear difference between us and this country, and that this country, as a free republic, remains a free republic. This and many other reasons are why those of us in the liberty movement need to stand strong against this level of inhumane and unconstitutional policy. Simply being an outsider and speaking your mind or damaging the establishment is not reason enough to hand over the keys to this country to a man or any candidate for that reason, who so clearly does not understand what the rule of law and liberty for all means. The destruction of some group of neocons does not take precedence over my life, or your life, nor the lives of innocent people everywhere. So I ask that you please join with me and stand strong for liberty. If you'd like to know more about me and what I do, please check out my website, jacobbogle.com, right there, or Facebook and Twitter, facebook.com/JacobBogle, and Twitter @JacobBogle. Thank you again for watching. Going to try to do some more of these. Thank you very much. God bless.